The alarm cut through my sleep like a blade of sound, and I was on my feet before my mind even caught up with my body. Red light pulsed across the narrow bunk room. Somewhere above me, heavy footsteps thundered across the metal floor, and a voice boomed through the speakers, announcing that all crew were to report to their stations immediately. My name is Leo Grant, and I was the only human aboard the ISV Halcyon, a coalition warship crewed by soldiers from a dozen worlds. I had been on this ship for 3 months, and in that time, I had learned exactly one thing for certain. Nobody here believed a human belonged among them. I pulled on my uniform, fingers fumbling with the clasps, and ran into the corridor. Around me, towering figures moved with practiced calm, their thick armored skin barely reacting to the blaring alarm. A Draxu soldier nearly twice my height shoved past me without apology, muttering something in his own language that I didn't need translated to understand was an insult. I reached the lower deck control room, breathless, and found my station already surrounded by 3 other crew members, each one twice my size. Commander Eula Prax, my superior, didn't even look at me as she snapped out orders. Grant, systems check deck 4, move. Yes, Commander, I said, already turning toward the console. Behind me, I heard someone chuckle. It was Reska Dorn, a broad-shouldered Verath soldier who never missed a chance to remind me that I was, in his words, a soft little animal playing soldier. Careful, little one, he said. Don't strain yourself pressing buttons. I didn't answer. I had learned that arguing only made it worse. Instead, I focused on my task, running diagnostics as fast as my fingers could move across the console. The ship had picked up an unidentified signal near the outer debris field, and Command wanted every system ready in case it turned into something dangerous. While I worked, my mind drifted, as it often did, to the reason I was even here. Humanity had only recently joined the coalition of allied species, and most of the older, more established races treated us the way you might treat a child who had wandered into an adult conversation. Tolerated, perhaps. Respected, never. I had volunteered for this assignment because I wanted to prove that humans could stand among the stars as equals. My family thought I was foolish. My friends thought I was reckless. The coalition soldiers I now served beside thought I was simply weak. Diagnostics complete, I called out. All systems in Deck 4 are green. Commander Prax nodded without looking at me, then turned to address the room. The signal has been identified as debris from a merchant vessel. Stand down from alert status. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the room, though for the coalition soldiers, it looked more like mild disappointment than relief. I turned to leave, eager to return to my bunk, when a shadow fell over me. I looked up, and my breath caught in my throat. Standing there was Draven Kor, the most feared warrior aboard the Halcyon, and if the stories were true, one of the most feared warriors in the entire coalition fleet. He stood well over 7 feet tall, his skin a deep shade of gray marked with old battle scars that told stories no words could match. His eyes were a piercing amber, sharp and calculating, and right now they were fixed directly on me. I had heard the stories from the moment I stepped aboard this ship. Draven Kor had fought in more conflicts than anyone could count. He had led boarding actions against pirate fleets, survived ambushes that should have killed him 3 times over, and was rumored to have taken down an entire raiding party single-handedly during the Battle of the Corvus Belt. Soldiers from a dozen species spoke his name with a mixture of awe and fear. And right now that same warrior was staring down at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You," he said, his voice deep and rough like grinding stone. "The human." "Yes, sir," I said, straightening my back, trying to appear taller than I was, which wasn't much. He studied me for a long moment, and I felt like every flaw in my posture, every ounce of nervousness in my expression, was being catalogued and judged. Finally he spoke again. "Your species has no place on a warship." The words landed like a physical blow, though I forced myself not to flinch. Around us, I noticed several other crew members had paused to watch, clearly enjoying the spectacle of the ship's greatest warrior putting the weak little human in his place. "With respect, sir," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I earned my place here the same as anyone." Something flickered in his amber eyes, though I couldn't tell if it was amusement or annoyance. "Earned," he repeated, as if tasting the word and finding it bitter. "You cannot lift more than 60 kilograms. Your bones would shatter under half the pressure mine can withstand. You have no claws, no natural armor, no venom, nothing that makes you dangerous. Tell me, human, what exactly did you earn?" I felt heat rise in my cheeks, embarrassment mixing with something sharper, something that felt a lot like anger, but I kept my voice calm. "Maybe I don't need claws or venom," I said. "Maybe there are other ways to be dangerous." For a moment, silence stretched between us. Then Draven Core let out a short, humorless laugh that echoed through the room. "Other ways," he said, shaking his head. "Stay out of my way, human. On the battlefield, weakness gets people killed. I do not have patience for weakness." He turned and walked away, his heavy footsteps fading down the corridor, and I stood there, fists clenched at my sides, feeling smaller than I had in years. Behind me, I heard Reska Dorn's mocking laughter join a few others, and I forced myself to walk away before my anger got the better of me. That night, I sat alone in the mess hall long after everyone else had gone to their bunks. The lights had been dimmed for the ship's night cycle, and the hum of the engines was the only sound keeping me company. I stared at the small photograph I kept in my jacket pocket, a picture of my parents standing outside our home on Earth, smiling like they had never once doubted me. I thought about all the reasons I had joined this mission. I thought about the recruiters who told me that humanity needed representatives who could show the coalition what our species was truly capable of. I thought about how easy it would be to simply give up, to request a transfer back to a human-only vessel where nobody would look at me like I was some fragile, useless creature. But then I thought about Draven Core's words, "Weakness gets people killed." Maybe he was right that I lacked claws and venom and armored skin, but I refused to believe that made me weak. I had grown up watching stories of explorers and soldiers who succeeded not because of brute strength, but because of clever thinking, because of loyalty, because of refusing to quit when everything told them to. I made a quiet promise to myself that night, sitting alone in that dim mess hall. I would prove to Draven Core and to everyone else who doubted me that humanity belonged among the stars. I didn't know how yet. I didn't know when the opportunity would come, but I knew, with absolute certainty, that I would not leave this ship in shame. The next morning, I reported for duty earlier than required, determined to show that I could outwork anyone on this vessel, even if I couldn't outmuscle them. I spent hours running maintenance checks on systems nobody else wanted to touch, memorizing schematics that most soldiers considered beneath their attention. If I couldn't win respect through strength, I would win it through knowledge, through diligence, through being the one person on this ship who understood every wire and circuit better than anyone else. Commander Prax noticed, though she said nothing beyond a brief nod of acknowledgement. Reska Dorn continued his mockery, calling me the little mechanic whenever I passed, but I noticed his jokes had grown slightly less sharp, as if some small part of him had begun to reconsider. Draven Core, however, remained distant and dismissive, as if I barely existed at all. He passed me in the corridors without a glance, ate his meals separately from the rest of the crew, and spoke to no one unless duty required it. I began to realize that his coldness toward me wasn't personal cruelty. It was simply how he treated everyone, humans and coalition soldiers alike. Respect, from him, had to be earned through deeds, not words. I didn't know it yet, but that opportunity to earn his respect was closer than I imagined. 3 days later, the Halcyon received a distress signal from a coalition outpost near the edge of contested space, and within hours, we were racing toward danger that would test everything I believed about myself. As the ship changed course, alarms once again blaring through every corridor, I felt a strange calm settle over me, different from the nervous energy of before. This time, I wasn't afraid of proving myself. I was ready. Little did I know, the trial waiting for me would be far more dangerous than any diagnostic check or mocking insult. It would be the first true test of whether I belonged among the stars, or whether Draven Kor's harsh judgment had been right all along. The outpost was called Farron Station, a small coalition base positioned near a cluster of asteroid fields that separated Allied territory from unclaimed space. When the distress signal reached us, the message had been garbled and cut short, but the words that came through clearly were enough to send a chill down my spine. Unknown vessels, hull breach, requesting immediate assistance. I stood at my station on the bridge, watching the view screen as the outpost grew larger in our sensors. Commander Prax stood at the center of the room, her 4 arms crossed as she studied the tactical display, while Draven Kor stood near the exit, already equipped with combat gear, his expression unreadable as always. Sensors show heavy damage to the station's outer ring, reported Nyla Voss, our sensor operator, a slender Calith woman whose skin shimmered faintly blue under the bridge lights. Multiple hull breaches. Life signs are fading. Enemy vessels? Commander Prax asked. None detected currently, Commander. Whatever attacked the station may have already left. Prax nodded sharply. Prepare a boarding team. We need to secure survivors and determine what happened here. I felt my heart quicken. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for, though I hadn't expected it to arrive wrapped in such danger. I stepped forward before I could stop myself. Commander, I'd like to volunteer for the boarding team. The room went quiet. Several soldiers turned to look at me, including Reska Dorn, who raised an eyebrow with obvious skepticism. Commander Prax studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. This isn't a diagnostic check, Grant, she said. This is a real mission. There could be survivors in critical condition, structural collapses, unknown hazards. I understand, Commander, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the nervous energy building inside my chest. But my training includes emergency medical response and technical repair. If the station's systems are failing, I might be able to help stabilize them faster than anyone else on this ship. Prax glanced toward Draven Kor, as if silently asking his opinion. The warrior's amber eyes settled on me, studying me with the same calculating intensity from our first encounter. Let him come, he said finally, his voice flat. If he slows us down, I will leave him behind. It wasn't exactly encouragement, but it was more than I expected. I nodded quickly, grateful for the chance, even wrapped in such a blunt warning. 20 minutes later, I found myself inside a small transport shuttle, squeezed between 2 massive Vareth soldiers as we approached Farron Station. Through the shuttle's viewport, I could see the extent of the damage. Entire sections of the outer ring had been torn open, twisted metal floating in slow orbit around the station, like broken bones exposed to space. Emergency lights flickered weakly through shattered windows, and I felt a knot form in my stomach at the thought of what we might find inside. The shuttle docked at one of the few intact airlocks, and our boarding team moved quickly through the station's corridors. The air inside was thin and cold, emergency systems clearly struggling to maintain basic life support. Debris littered the floor, and more than once, I had to step carefully around scorched marks that told stories of violence I didn't want to imagine too closely. Split into 2 teams, Draven Kor commanded, his voice cutting through the tense silence. Dorn, Voss, with me toward the command center. Grant, remain with the secondary team and check the medical bay. I nodded, following Commander Prax and 2 other soldiers toward the station's medical wing. The corridor leading there had partially collapsed, forcing us to climb over twisted metal beams and shattered support struts. My hands, smaller and more nimble than the coalition soldiers around me, found handholds and pathways through the wreckage that the larger soldiers struggled to navigate. Grant, take point, Prax said, surprising me. Your size might let you move through the tighter gaps ahead. For the first time since arriving on this ship, I felt genuinely useful, rather than merely tolerated. I moved carefully through a narrow gap in the collapsed ceiling, emerging into a section of corridor that opened directly into the medical bay. What I found made my stomach turn. Several coalition soldiers lay scattered across the floor, injured and unconscious, their uniforms torn and stained. Medical equipment lay shattered around them, clearly damaged during whatever attack had struck the station. "We have survivors," I called back through my comm unit, quickly moving to the nearest injured soldier, a Draxu engineer whose leg was pinned beneath a fallen support beam. "Multiple casualties. Need immediate medical assistance." Commander Prax and the others squeezed through the gap behind me, and we began working quickly to free the trapped survivors. My training kicked in almost automatically, and I found myself directing the Coalition soldiers on how to safely lift the beam without causing further injury to the trapped engineer. "Lift from this side, evenly, on my count," I said, positioning myself to guide the beam once it was raised. 1, 2, 3. The soldiers lifted together, and I quickly pulled the injured engineer free, immediately applying pressure to a wound on his leg while shouting instructions for someone to retrieve the emergency medical kit from my pack. Over the next 20 minutes, we worked to stabilize 5 injured survivors, and I found myself moving between them, applying basic medical care that I had learned during training, care that none of the larger Coalition soldiers had been taught, since their biology rarely required such delicate intervention. It was in the middle of stabilizing the last survivor that the ground shook violently beneath us. Alarms blared through the station's remaining systems, and Commander Prax's comm crackled with urgent static. "All teams, be advised, unidentified vessel has returned and is approaching the station. Extraction may be compromised." My heart pounded as I finished securing a bandage around the survivor's shoulder. Around me, the Coalition soldiers exchanged tense glances, clearly calculating the danger of remaining inside a station under potential attack. "We need to move the injured to the shuttle immediately," Commander Prax said, already lifting one of the survivors with her powerful arms. I helped guide the others through the collapsed corridor, my smaller frame once again proving useful as I navigated tight spaces the larger soldiers couldn't easily fit through. We were halfway back toward the airlock when Draven Kor's voice cut through the comm channel, tense in a way I had never heard before. "Command center secure, but station structural integrity is failing. Multiple sections collapsing. All teams evacuate immediately." I felt the floor tremble again, more violently this time, and dust rained down from the ceiling above us. One of the injured survivors, a young Calith technician barely older than me, cried out as the beam supporting the corridor ahead of us groaned and began to bend under stress. "The corridor's collapsing," I shouted, grabbing the technician's arm and pulling her back just as a section of ceiling crashed down where she had been standing moments before. Commander Prax's team was already moving the other survivors toward the airlock, but I realized with growing horror that the path we needed to take was now blocked by fallen debris. I scanned the area quickly, my mind racing through the station schematics I had memorized during my off-duty study sessions. "There's an alternate route," I said, remembering a maintenance corridor I had studied purely out of curiosity weeks earlier. "Through the secondary systems hub, it connects back to the docking bay." "Are you certain?" Prax asked, her voice tense as another tremor shook the station. "Yes, Commander. I studied the station layout during transit. This way." I led the group through a narrow maintenance hatch, the young technician leaning heavily on my shoulder as we moved as quickly as her injuries allowed. Behind us, I could hear the station groaning and cracking, sections collapsing in a slow, terrifying cascade. We emerged into the docking bay just as Draven Kor's team arrived from the opposite direction, and I saw something flicker across the warrior's face when he noticed me guiding the injured survivors safely toward the shuttle. It wasn't quite respect, not yet, but it was surprise, and for Draven Kor, surprise was rare enough to feel significant. "Everyone aboard, now!" Commander Prax shouted, and we scrambled into the shuttle just as another section of the station collapsed behind us, sealing off the path we had just escaped through. The shuttle detached from the failing station, and through the viewport, I watched Farron Station crumble further, sections breaking away and drifting into the surrounding debris field. We had made it out with 5 survivors, all of whom would have died if we hadn't reached them in time. Back aboard the Halcyon, as medical teams took over care for the rescued survivors, I found myself standing near the shuttle bay, exhausted and covered in dust, when Draven Kor approached me. He said nothing at first, simply studying me with those piercing amber eyes. "You knew the maintenance route," he said finally. "I studied the schematics during transit," I admitted. "I thought it might be useful someday." He nodded slowly, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "Useful," he repeated, though this time the word didn't sound bitter. "Perhaps." He turned and walked away without another word, but I noticed he didn't add any insult this time, didn't dismiss me the way he had before. It wasn't respect, not yet, but it was a beginning. That night, as I lay in my bunk, exhausted from the mission, I allowed myself a small, quiet smile. I had proven, at least to myself, that my worth on this ship extended beyond brute strength. I had saved lives today, using knowledge and quick thinking rather than muscle or claws. But deep down, I knew this was only the first step. Dravencor's respect, if I ever truly earned it, would require far more than a single successful mission. And somewhere out in the vast darkness of space, I sensed that greater trials were still waiting for me. Trials that would test not just my knowledge, but my courage, my loyalty, and everything I believed about what it meant to stand among the stars as an equal. 3 weeks passed after the rescue at Farron Station, and life aboard the Halcyon slowly began to shift, though the change was subtle enough that I almost missed it. Reska Dorn still made comments about my size, but they had lost their edge, becoming closer to the kind of teasing soldiers shared among equals rather than genuine contempt. Commander Prax assigned me to more responsibilities, trusting my technical knowledge for tasks that mattered. Even some of the other Coalition soldiers had begun nodding to me in the corridors, small gestures that meant more to me than they probably realized. Dravencor, however, remained a mystery. He was neither warm nor openly hostile, simply distant, as if still deciding what to make of the strange, fragile human who had somehow proven useful once. I told myself that was fine. I hadn't come aboard this ship seeking his approval specifically. I had come to prove something about my entire species. If Dravencor never fully accepted me, I would still have accomplished what I set out to do. That belief was tested more thoroughly than I could have imagined when the Halcyon received orders to escort a Coalition diplomatic vessel through a region of space long disputed between our alliance and a hostile faction known as the Threxil Combine. The mission briefing was tense, every officer aware that diplomatic escorts through contested territory carried significant risk. "The Threxil have grown increasingly aggressive in recent months," Commander Prax explained during the briefing, standing before a holographic display of the disputed region. "Intelligence suggests they may attempt to intercept the diplomatic vessel to disrupt ongoing peace negotiations. Our mission is simple: escort the vessel safely to Coalition Station Varath Prime. We are not to engage unless absolutely necessary." I sat near the back of the briefing room, listening carefully, my stomach tight, with a nervous energy I had learned to recognize as anticipation rather than fear. Beside me, Nyla Voss leaned over slightly. "You seem calm for someone about to fly into contested space," she whispered. "I've learned that panicking doesn't help anything," I whispered back, though inwardly my thoughts were far from calm. Dravencor stood near the front of the room, arms crossed, listening without expression. When Commander Prax finished the briefing, he spoke up, his rough voice cutting through the murmurs of the crew. "If the Threxil intend to strike, they will do so where our escort formation is weakest. We should prepare for combat regardless of the mission's diplomatic nature." Prax nodded in agreement. "Agreed. All combat personnel will remain at heightened readiness throughout the journey." The next 2 days passed in tense anticipation as the Halcyon guided the diplomatic vessel, a sleek, silver ship called the Aurelia's Promise, through the winding paths of the disputed region. I spent most of my shifts monitoring the ship's systems, running constant diagnostics, and helping maintain the shields that protected us from the debris fields scattered throughout the contested space. It was during the 3rd day of our journey, as we approached the final stretch before reaching Coalition Station Varath Prime, that everything went wrong. "Multiple contacts detected," Nyla Voss shouted from her station, her voice sharp with alarm. "Threxil vessels, 6 of them, emerging from behind the debris field ahead. The bridge erupted into controlled chaos as Commander Prax barked orders, the crew scrambling to their combat stations. I felt my pulse quicken as I moved to my own station, running system checks as fast as my fingers could manage. "Shields at full power," I called out, monitoring the readouts. "Weapon systems online." Through the view screen, I watched as 6 sleek, angular vessels emerged from the shadows of the debris field, their hulls painted in the dark red and black colors of the Threxil Combine. They moved with predatory precision, spreading into a formation clearly designed to surround both the Halcyon and the diplomatic vessel we were escorting. "They're targeting the Aurelia's Promise," Voss reported. "They intend to disable the diplomatic vessel, not destroy it." "They want to capture the ambassador," Commander Prax said grimly. "All hands, defensive positions, protect the Aurelia's Promise at all costs." The Halcyon shuddered as the first volley of enemy fire struck our shields, and I gripped the edge of my console, forcing myself to stay focused despite the chaos erupting around me. Dravenkor had already moved to the tactical station, his amber eyes narrowed with cold, calculating focus as he directed our ship's weapons toward the incoming threats. 2 enemy vessels breaking formation, attempting to flank the Aurelia's Promise, he announced. "Redirect defensive fire, intercept course." Commander Prax relayed the orders, and the Halcyon banked sharply, engines straining as we moved to intercept the flanking enemy ships. I monitored the shield systems carefully, watching as the protective energy barriers absorbed hit after hit, slowly weakening under the relentless assault. "Shields at 60%, I called out. "We can't sustain this much longer without diverting additional power." "Divert non-essential systems to shields," Commander Prax ordered. I worked quickly, rerouting power from secondary life support and non-critical systems toward the shield generators, buying us precious extra time. Through the chaos, I heard Dravenkor's voice, steady and commanding despite the danger surrounding us. "Target their engines, disable, do not destroy. We need survivors for interrogation." The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was likely only minutes. The Halcyon's weapons found their mark against 2 of the enemy vessels, disabling their engines and leaving them adrift, while the remaining Threxil ships continued their aggressive assault against the Aurelia's Promise. "The diplomatic vessel's shields are failing," Voss shouted. "They can't withstand another direct hit." I felt panic rising in my chest, but I forced myself to think clearly. "Commander, if I can access the Aurelia's Promise's remote diagnostic systems, I might be able to reroute their auxiliary power to reinforce their shields." Prax glanced at me, her expression tense. "Do it, Grant, quickly." I worked frantically, my fingers flying across the console as I established a remote connection to the diplomatic vessel's systems. It was delicate work, the kind that required patience and precision, qualities I had spent months honing, while everyone else dismissed me as merely the weak human aboard their ship. "Rerouting auxiliary power now," I said, watching the readouts carefully. "Shields should stabilize within moments." Just as the Aurelia's Promise's shields flickered back to strength, one of the remaining Threxil vessels broke formation, diving directly toward the Halcyon in what was clearly a desperate, aggressive maneuver. "Incoming!" Voss shouted. The ship shook violently as the enemy vessel's weapons struck our hull directly, bypassing our weakened shields. Alarms blared, and I heard the sickening sound of metal groaning under stress, somewhere below the bridge. "Hull breach on Deck 3, someone shouted. "Emergency crews needed immediately." Commander Prax's expression hardened. "Core, Grant, take a team down to Deck 3, contain the breach before it compromises the entire ship." Dravenkor nodded sharply, and within moments, I found myself following him through the ship's corridors, my heart pounding as alarms continued to blare around us. We reached Deck 3 to find chaos, sparks flying from damaged conduits, emergency bulkheads struggling to seal the breached section. "The breach is spreading faster than the emergency systems can contain it," I said, quickly assessing the damage. "If we don't manually reinforce the bulkhead, it could compromise the entire deck within minutes. Then we reinforce it manually," Dravencore said, already moving toward the damaged section. We worked together, an unlikely pair, the massive, battle-hardened warrior and the small, determined human, both focused entirely on preventing catastrophe. I directed Dravencore on how to properly brace the failing support struts while I worked to reroute emergency power to the bulkhead's sealing mechanisms. It was in the middle of this desperate repair that disaster struck. A secondary explosion rocked the deck, likely from a damaged conduit finally giving way under the stress. The force threw me backward, and I felt a sharp, burning pain as debris struck my shoulder, knocking me to the ground. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard Dravencore shout something, and I looked up to see him pinned partially beneath a fallen support beam, his massive strength apparently insufficient to immediately free himself from the awkward angle at which he had been trapped. "Core!" I shouted, forcing myself to my feet, despite the pain radiating through my shoulder. "Grant, the breach," he said through gritted teeth, clearly more concerned with the ship's safety than his own situation. "Focus on containing it. That is an order." I looked between the failing bulkhead and the trapped warrior, and in that moment, something inside me refused to simply follow orders that meant abandoning someone who needed help. I had spent months trying to prove that humanity possessed qualities beyond mere physical strength, qualities like loyalty, like refusing to leave someone behind regardless of the personal cost. "With respect, sir," I said, moving toward him despite his protest, "I won't leave you here." I positioned myself against the fallen beam, using every bit of leverage my smaller frame could manage, pushing with strength I didn't know I possessed. It wasn't enough on its own, but combined with Dravencore's own efforts to push against the beam from his trapped position, we slowly, painfully managed to shift it just enough for him to pull himself free. "The bulkhead," he said immediately, ignoring his own injuries as he moved toward the failing containment system. Together, despite my throbbing shoulder and his own injuries from being trapped, we worked frantically to reinforce the bulkhead, manually sealing the breach just as the emergency systems finally caught up and locked the section down completely. The alarms quieted, and the immediate danger passed, though the aftermath left both of us breathing heavily, covered in dust and minor injuries. Dravencore turned to look at me, his amber eyes studying me with an intensity I hadn't seen before. "You disobeyed a direct order," he said. "Yes, sir," I admitted, bracing myself for whatever consequence might follow. "You could have focused solely on the breach and let me handle my own situation." "I could have," I agreed, "but I chose not to." He was quiet for a long moment, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Finally, he spoke again, his voice lower, less guarded than I had ever heard it. "On my homeworld, warriors are taught that loyalty to the mission always outweighs loyalty to the individual. Leaving a comrade behind, if the mission demands it, is considered honorable, not cowardly. Where I come from," I said, still catching my breath, "we believe that leaving someone behind, when you have the power to help them, is never honorable, no matter what the mission demands." Something shifted in his expression then, something that looked almost like genuine consideration rather than dismissal. He didn't respond immediately, instead turning to survey the damage around us. But I noticed he moved slightly slower than usual, favoring the leg that had been trapped beneath the beam. Back on the bridge, the battle had turned in our favor. The remaining Threxil vessels, faced with disabled comrades and a diplomatic vessel now protected by reinforced shields, retreated into the depths of the debris field, abandoning their attempt to capture the ambassador. The Aurelia's Promise continued safely toward Coalition Station Varath Prime, the mission ultimately successful despite the danger we had faced. I was treated in the medical bay for my shoulder injury, which turned out to be a minor fracture, painful but not severe. As the medical technician finished bandaging the wound, Dravencore appeared in the doorway, his own leg wrapped in a temporary brace. "You should rest," he said, though it sounded more like an observation than a command. "So should you," I replied. A faint expression crossed his face, something I almost mistook for the beginning of a smile before it disappeared just as quickly. Perhaps we are more alike than I first believed, human." He turned and left before I could respond, leaving me sitting there, exhausted, injured, but filled with a quiet satisfaction I hadn't expected to feel. I had disobeyed a direct order to help someone who had spent months treating me with nothing but cold dismissal, and in doing so, I had glimpsed something beneath Draven Kor's harsh exterior that made me believe, for the first time, that perhaps his respect wasn't entirely out of reach. But I also understood that one moment of shared danger, however significant, wasn't enough to erase months of doubt built into a warrior's worldview. Draven Kor had spent his entire life believing that strength, in its physical form, determined worth on the battlefield. I had shown him a different kind of strength, but I sensed that truly changing his perspective would require far more than a single act of loyalty during a moment of crisis. Little did I know, the greatest test of that belief was still ahead of us, waiting in the depths of space, where an even greater danger would soon force both of us to confront everything we thought we understood about strength, loyalty, and what it truly meant to be a warrior worthy of respect. In the days following the battle near Coalition Station Varath Prime, the Halcyon underwent repairs at a nearby shipyard, while the crew recovered from the encounter. My shoulder healed steadily under the care of the ship's medical staff, though the ache remained a constant reminder of how close we had come to disaster. During this time, something unexpected began to happen. Draven Kor started seeking me out, not with the cold dismissal of before, but with a quiet curiosity that I found both surprising and, admittedly, a little unsettling. The first time it happened, I was in the ship's small training area, practicing basic hand-to-hand techniques against a padded target, trying to strengthen my injured shoulder through careful, controlled movement. I hadn't heard him enter, and when I turned around, I nearly startled at finding him watching me from across the room. "Your technique lacks power," he observed, his amber eyes studying my movements critically. "I'm aware," I said, slightly embarrassed. "I'm working with what I have." "That is precisely the problem," he said, stepping closer. "You think only in terms of what you lack, rather than what you possess." I lowered my arms, curious despite myself. "What do you mean?" He gestured toward the training target. "Show me your strike again." I hesitated, then threw a punch toward the padded surface, putting as much force behind it as my healing shoulder allowed. It was, admittedly, unimpressive compared to the powerful blows I had seen Coalition soldiers deliver during training sessions. "You rely on your arm alone," Draven Kor said, moving to stand beside me. "Your species may lack our physical strength, but you possess flexibility and speed that most Coalition races cannot match. Use your entire body, not just your limb." He demonstrated, his massive form somehow shifting with surprising fluidity as he showed me how to rotate my hips and shoulders to generate power from my whole body rather than relying solely on arm strength. I watched carefully, then attempted the movement myself, feeling an immediate difference in the force behind my strike. "Better," he said, something almost like approval, coloring his rough voice. Over the following days, these impromptu training sessions became a regular occurrence, though neither of us ever officially arranged them. Draven Kor would appear in the training area at unpredictable hours, offering brief, gruff instruction before disappearing again, leaving me to practice what he had taught me. I found myself looking forward to these sessions, not just for the physical training, but for the strange, evolving dynamic between us. It was during one such session, nearly 2 weeks after the battle, that Draven Kor finally spoke about something beyond mere combat technique. We had finished a particularly grueling practice session, and I was catching my breath near the edge of the training mat when he sat down heavily on a nearby bench, his expression uncharacteristically distant. "You remind me of someone," he said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself rather than to me. I glanced at him, uncertain whether to respond, but curiosity won out. "Who?" He was silent for a long moment, and I wondered if he would simply ignore the question the way he often deflected personal inquiries. But then he spoke, his voice lower, carrying a weight I hadn't heard from him before. "I had a younger sibling once, Kalen. He was smaller than most of our kind, weaker by our standards, though he never let that stop him from trying to prove himself among warriors twice his size. I sat down slowly on the mat, sensing that this was a story he didn't often share. What happened to him? Dravencor's amber eyes grew distant, focused on some memory far beyond the walls of the training room. There was a conflict, many years ago, against raiders who attacked our settlement. Kalen was young, untested, but he refused to be left behind when the rest of us went to defend our home. I ordered him to remain in the shelters, believing him too weak, too inexperienced to survive the battle ahead. He didn't listen, I said quietly, already sensing where this story was heading. He did not, Dravencor confirmed. He followed regardless, believing he could prove his worth despite his size. During the battle, he saved the life of a wounded warrior who would have died without his intervention, using cleverness and speed rather than strength to outmaneuver an attacker 3 times his size. That sounds like something to be proud of, I said carefully. It was, Dravencor agreed, though his expression remained heavy with something that looked like old grief. But in saving that warrior, Kalen was struck down himself. He died believing he had finally earned the respect he had always sought, respect that I, his own brother, had refused to give him while he lived. The room fell silent, and I felt the weight of his confession settle over both of us. I finally understood why Dravencor's harsh judgment of my abilities had always carried an edge sharper than simple prejudice. He wasn't merely doubting my strength. He was reliving old grief, old regret, projected onto every soldier who reminded him of the brother he had failed to protect and failed to properly value while he still could. I judged you the same way I judged him, Dravencor continued, his voice quieter now. I saw your size, your lack of natural weapons, and I assumed weakness, just as I once assumed weakness in Kalen. It took your actions, both at Farron Station and during the breach on Deck 3, to make me question whether my judgment had been wrong all those years ago, and wrong again with you. I didn't know how to respond to such a personal revelation, so I simply sat with him in silence for a while, allowing him space to process whatever emotions this confession had stirred. Finally, I spoke, choosing my words carefully. I think your brother would be proud of the respect you're capable of giving now, even if it took time to get here. Dravencor looked at me then, something unreadable in his expression, before he nodded slowly. Perhaps, he said. Though respect, once earned, must still be tested, I would like to see how far your capabilities truly extend, human, beyond moments of crisis and desperation. What do you have in mind? I asked, sensing a shift in his tone, something more deliberate than casual conversation. There is a training exercise, he said, standing up from the bench, his expression returning to its usual stern focus. A simulation used to test the readiness of coalition warriors before significant deployments. It is rarely offered to non-combat personnel, but given recent events, I believe you are ready to attempt it. I felt a flicker of nervous anticipation. What does it involve? A simulated combat scenario, designed to test not just physical capability, but decision-making under extreme pressure. Many warriors fail on their first attempt, some fail on their 10th. And if I fail? I asked. Then you fail, he said simply, but you will have tried, and trying, in itself, carries value that many overlook. The following day, I found myself standing inside the ship's holographic training chamber, a large circular room capable of generating incredibly realistic simulated environments. Dravencor stood at the control console alongside Commander Prax, who had been informed of the exercise and had granted permission, though her expression suggested she remained uncertain about its wisdom. The simulation will place you in a scenario involving a hostile boarding action, Dravencor explained, his voice taking on the formal tone of an instructor rather than the more personal warmth from our recent conversations. You will need to navigate the scenario using whatever tools and strategies you believe appropriate. The simulation ends when you either complete the objective or are eliminated. Understood, I said, trying to steady my nerves. The chamber flickered to life around me, transforming into what appeared to be the interior of a Coalition space station under attack. Simulated alarms blared, and holographic figures representing hostile borders appeared throughout the corridors ahead of me. I understood immediately that this exercise wasn't designed to test brute combat strength, since I possessed none to speak of. It was designed to test everything else: my ability to think quickly, to use my environment cleverly, to make decisions under pressure that could mean the difference between success and failure. I moved carefully through the simulated corridors, using techniques Draven Core had taught me during our training sessions, relying on speed and agility to avoid direct confrontation with the larger holographic enemies whenever possible. When avoidance wasn't an option, I used the environment itself, redirecting simulated conduits to create distractions, using narrow spaces that the larger simulated enemies struggled to navigate. The simulation grew increasingly difficult, throwing scenarios at me that required split-second decisions. At one point, I encountered a simulated wounded Coalition soldier and had to decide whether to continue toward the primary objective or divert to provide assistance, knowing the delay could compromise the entire mission. I chose to help, just as I had chosen to help Draven Core during the real hull breach weeks earlier, understanding that abandoning someone in need, even within a training simulation, went against everything I believed about what it meant to serve alongside others. The delay cost me precious time, and I found myself facing the simulation's final challenge with less preparation than I would have liked. A group of holographic enemies had gathered near the simulated station's central control room, clearly anticipating my approach. I paused, studying the scenario carefully, remembering everything Draven Core had taught me about using my strengths rather than dwelling on my limitations. Instead of attempting a direct approach, which would have led to certain simulated defeat given the number of enemies present, I found an alternate route through a maintenance shaft, similar to the strategy that had saved lives at Farron Station. The narrow space, impossible for the larger simulated enemies to follow, allowed me to bypass the ambush entirely and reach the control room from an unexpected angle. The simulation ended moments later, the holographic environment fading away to reveal the training chamber's plain metal walls once again. I stood there, breathing heavily, uncertain whether I had succeeded or failed, until Draven Core's voice broke the silence. "Objective complete," he announced, studying the readouts on the control console with visible surprise. "Time exceeded optimal parameters due to your decision to assist the simulated wounded soldier, but mission success nonetheless." Commander Prax looked between the console and me with an expression of genuine surprise. Most warriors who choose to prioritize a wounded companion during this simulation fail to complete the primary objective in time, she said. "You found a way to accomplish both." I felt a surge of quiet pride, though I tried not to let it show too openly. "I used what I had," I said simply. Draven Core studied me for a long moment, and I saw something in his expression that I had never seen directed toward me before, something that looked remarkably like genuine, unguarded respect. "You did more than that," he said. "You demonstrated exactly the qualities I once dismissed as weakness. Compassion, adaptability, refusal to abandon those who need help, even at personal cost. These are not weaknesses, human. They are strengths I failed to recognize for far too long." I didn't know how to respond to such a direct acknowledgement, so I simply nodded, allowing the moment to settle between us without needing further words. Commander Prax excused herself from the training chamber, leaving Draven Core and me alone amid the quiet hum of the deactivated holographic systems. "There is a mission approaching," Draven Core said after a long moment of silence. "A significant one, more dangerous than anything we have faced together thus far. Coalition intelligence has identified a Threxil Combine stronghold preparing a major offensive against Allied territory. The Halcyon has been assigned to a joint task force intended to disrupt this offensive before it begins." "When do we depart?" I asked. "Within the week," he said. "It will not be a simple mission, Grant. Many will not return." I felt a chill at his words, but beneath the fear, I also felt something else, a quiet determination that had grown steadily within me since the day I first stepped aboard this ship. "I'll be ready," I said. Draven Core studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly, something that looked almost like the beginning of trust settling into his expression. "I believe you will," he said. "Prepare yourself, human. What lies ahead will test everything we have both come to believe about strength, loyalty, and what it truly means to stand together against overwhelming odds." As he turned to leave the training chamber, I stood alone amid the quiet hum of deactivated systems, feeling the weight of what lay ahead settle over me. I had spent months proving myself against smaller trials, earning grudging respect through persistence and quick thinking. But something told me that the mission Draven Core had just described would demand more from me than anything I had faced before, a final test that would determine, once and for all, whether I truly belonged among the stars as an equal to those who had once mocked me without hesitation. The week passed in a blur of preparation, briefings, and quiet moments of reflection. The Halcyon joined a larger coalition task force near the edge of contested space, a gathering of warships from a dozen allied worlds, all preparing for what Commander Prax described as one of the most significant operations the Coalition had undertaken in recent memory. The Threxil Combine stronghold, hidden deep within an asteroid field known as the Cassandra Cluster, had been identified as the staging ground for an offensive that could shift the balance of power across the entire disputed region. I spent much of that week training alongside Draven Core, refining the techniques he had taught me, pushing myself harder than I ever had before. He no longer treated me with the distant coldness of our early encounters. Instead, he pushed me the way I imagined he might have once pushed his own brother, with a demanding intensity that carried genuine care beneath its surface. "You will need every advantage you can gather," he told me during one of our final training sessions before departure. "The Cassandra Cluster is a labyrinth of asteroid tunnels and hidden chambers. Coalition intelligence suggests the stronghold's interior defenses rely heavily on narrow corridors designed to funnel invaders into vulnerable positions. Corridors too narrow for the Threxil's larger allies to navigate easily," I said, understanding immediately. "Precisely," he confirmed. "Your size, once considered a weakness, may prove essential in navigating those spaces. I have recommended you for the primary infiltration team." The words struck me with a mixture of pride and nervous apprehension. Being recommended by Draven Core, the most feared warrior in the Coalition fleet, for a role in the primary infiltration team of such a significant mission, felt like the culmination of everything I had worked toward since first stepping aboard this ship. "Thank you," I said quietly. "Do not thank me yet," he replied, his expression serious. "This mission carries genuine danger. Many warriors far more experienced than you have died in operations less complex than what we are about to attempt. I would rather see you afraid and prepared than confident and careless." "I understand," I said, and I meant it. 3 days later, the Coalition task force arrived at the edge of the Cassandra Cluster, and the mission began in earnest. The plan called for a coordinated assault, with several warships providing cover fire against the stronghold's exterior defenses, while a smaller infiltration team, myself included, would navigate the asteroid field's hidden tunnels to disable the stronghold's primary defense systems from within. I stood inside the shuttle bay alongside the rest of the infiltration team, checking my equipment one final time. Beside me stood Draven Core, along with Commander Prax, Nyla Voss, and several other Coalition soldiers I had come to know during my months aboard the Halcyon. Reska Dorn stood nearby as well, and to my surprise, he approached me before we boarded the shuttle. "Grant," he said, his usual mocking tone absent for perhaps the first time since I had met him. "I owe you an apology. I judged you before I understood what you were capable of." I nodded, appreciating the gesture more than I let on. "We all judge before we understand sometimes," I said. "What matters is what we do afterward." He nodded, a faint smile crossing his features. "Watch yourself out there, little mechanic, and know that if things go wrong, I intend to have your back." "Same to you," I replied, feeling a warmth I hadn't expected from someone who had spent months mocking me relentlessly. The shuttle launched, carrying us toward the twisting asteroid tunnels of the Cassandra Cluster, while behind us, the Coalition warships began their coordinated assault against the stronghold's exterior defenses. Through the shuttle's viewport, I watched flashes of defensive fire illuminate the darkness of space, a stark reminder of the danger waiting ahead. We landed inside a hidden docking chamber, deep within one of the larger asteroids, part of the tunnel network that Coalition intelligence had mapped through careful reconnaissance. The chamber was dimly lit, emergency lighting casting long shadows across rough stone walls that had been carved and reinforced into a functional base of operations by the Threxil Combine. "Move quickly and quietly," Draven Core instructed as we exited the shuttle. "The primary defense control room should be located roughly 2 kilometers from our current position, according to the intelligence gathered." We moved through the tunnels in careful formation, Draven Core leading with Commander Prax close behind, while I remained near the middle of our group alongside Nyla Voss, both of us monitoring our equipment for any signs of detection. The tunnels twisted and narrowed as we progressed, occasionally forcing the larger Coalition soldiers to squeeze through gaps that clearly hadn't been designed with their size in mind. It was during one such narrow passage that disaster struck. A hidden sensor, cleverly concealed within the rock itself, detected our presence, triggering an alarm that echoed through the tunnel network with piercing intensity. "We've been detected," Voss shouted. "Defense forces incoming from multiple directions. Move forward, quickly," Draven Core commanded. "We need to reach the control room before they can reinforce their position." We broke into a run, moving as fast as the narrow tunnels allowed, while behind us, the sounds of approaching Threxil defenders grew louder with each passing moment. I felt my heart pounding, adrenaline surging through my body as we pushed forward, navigating the twisting passages with a mixture of urgency and careful precision. We reached a wider chamber just as the first wave of Threxil defenders emerged from a side passage, cutting off our path forward. Draven Core moved immediately to engage the defenders, his massive form a blur of controlled, precise movement as he neutralized the threats blocking our path. Commander Prax and the other Coalition soldiers joined the fight, while I remained near the rear of our group, searching desperately for an alternate route around the confrontation. "There!" I shouted, spotting a narrow gap in the chamber's far wall, clearly another maintenance passage similar to the ones I had used during previous missions. This connects to the tunnel network beyond the current defense line. "Take Voss and proceed to the control room," Draven Core instructed, still engaged with the remaining defenders. "We will hold this position and follow once the path is clear." I hesitated, uncertain about leaving the others behind, but I understood the tactical necessity of the plan. Nyla Voss and I squeezed through the narrow gap, leaving the sounds of the ongoing confrontation behind us as we navigated deeper into the tunnel network. We reached the primary defense control room roughly 10 minutes later, finding it guarded by only a handful of Threxil technicians who hadn't expected an approach from this particular direction. Voss and I moved quickly, using the element of surprise to neutralize the guards before they could raise an alarm, then immediately began working to disable the stronghold's primary defense systems. "I need access to their central network," I said, quickly connecting my equipment to the control room's main console. "If I can disable their shield generators, our warships outside will be able to break through the exterior defenses." I worked as quickly as my training allowed, navigating unfamiliar systems with the same careful precision that had served me well throughout my time aboard the Halcyon. Behind me, Voss kept watch, her weapon ready in case additional defenders arrived. "Shield generators offline," I announced finally, watching the console's readouts confirm the successful disruption. "Relaying confirmation to the fleet now." Through my comm unit, I heard Commander Prax's voice, tense but relieved. "Confirmed, shield generators down. Fleet is beginning full assault on the stronghold's exterior defenses." But our relief was short-lived. Moments later, the control room's remaining systems flared with warning lights, and Voss's expression turned grim as she studied a nearby monitor. "They've detected the disruption," she said. "Reinforcements are converging on our position from multiple directions." I felt a surge of panic, but forced myself to think clearly. "We need to hold this position until Core and the others can rejoin us." We barricaded the control room's entrance as best we could, using whatever equipment was available, and prepared to defend our position against the approaching reinforcements. The wait felt agonizingly long, every passing second stretching into what felt like an eternity, until finally, the sound of the barricaded entrance being forced open echoed through the room. I braced myself, expecting hostile defenders, but instead, Draven Corps burst through the entrance, followed closely by Commander Prax and the remaining members of our team. Relief flooded through me at the sight of them, though I noticed several members of our group bore fresh injuries from the earlier confrontation. Control room secured. Shield generators disabled, I reported quickly. Fleet has begun their assault on the exterior defenses. Draven Corps nodded, though his expression remained tense. The Threxil Combine will not surrender their stronghold easily. We need to reach the extraction point before their reinforcements can fully mobilize. We moved quickly through the tunnel network, retracing our path toward the docking chamber where our shuttle waited. The sounds of battle grew louder as we approached, coalition forces and Threxil defenders clashing throughout the stronghold's interior corridors as the exterior assault began breaching the weakened defenses. We were nearly at the docking chamber when disaster struck once again. A group of Threxil defenders, clearly more heavily armed than those we had encountered previously, ambushed our group from a concealed side passage, catching us by surprise in a narrow section of tunnel that offered little room to maneuver. The confrontation was brief but intense, and in the chaos, I saw Draven Corps take a direct hit meant to incapacitate him, a blast that struck his side and sent him staggering against the tunnel wall. Without thinking, I moved toward him, ignoring the obvious danger, determined not to leave him vulnerable the way I had refused to leave him trapped beneath the fallen beam weeks earlier. "Grant, stay back," he shouted, even as he struggled to regain his footing. I ignored the command, positioning myself to help support his weight, while Commander Prax and the others worked to neutralize the remaining threats. Together, we managed to push through the ambush, reaching the docking chamber just as the final Threxil defenders were subdued. We boarded the shuttle quickly, and as we launched away from the crumbling stronghold, I finally had a moment to check on Draven Corps' condition. The blast had left a significant wound along his side, though the ship's medical technician assured us it wasn't life-threatening, provided he received proper treatment soon. Through the shuttle's viewport, I watched the Cassandra cluster stronghold finally succumb to the Coalition fleet's assault, explosions rippling across its surface as the Threxil Combine's offensive plans crumbled along with their base of operations. The mission, despite its dangers, had been a success. Back aboard the Halcyon, as the medical team worked to properly treat Draven Corps' injury, I found myself standing nearby, exhausted but relieved that our mission had succeeded without any losses among our team. Commander Prax approached me, her expression carrying a warmth I hadn't seen from her before. "You performed exceptionally well today, Grant," she said. "Your knowledge of the tunnel systems and your quick thinking under pressure made a significant difference in the mission's success." "Thank you, Commander," I said, feeling a quiet pride at her words. She nodded, then glanced toward Draven Corps, who watched our conversation from his position on the medical table, his expression unreadable despite his injury. "I believe someone else wishes to speak with you," she said, before excusing herself to attend to other duties. I approached Draven Corps slowly, uncertain what to expect. He studied me for a long moment, his amber eyes carrying an intensity that felt different from anything I had seen from him before, something warmer, something that finally, truly resembled genuine respect rather than grudging acknowledgement. "You disobeyed a direct order again," he said, though his tone carried no real anger. "I seem to have a habit of doing that when it comes to you," I replied, allowing a small smile to cross my features. He studied me for another long moment, and I noticed several other members of our crew, including Commander Prax, Nyla Voss, and Reska Dorn, had gathered nearby, clearly curious about the exchange taking place. Draven Corps seemed to notice this as well, and rather than dismissing the attention, he allowed it, as if understanding that what he was about to say deserved to be witnessed. "When I first encountered you aboard this ship," he said, his voice carrying to everyone gathered nearby. "I believed your species had no place among warriors. I judged your strength by the same standards I judge my own kind, and by those standards, you fell short in every measurable way." I remained silent, uncertain where this was leading, though I sensed the weight of the moment building around us. "But strength," he continued, "is not measured solely by the power of one's body. It is measured by the willingness to act despite fear, to help others despite personal cost, to refuse abandonment of those who need assistance, regardless of the danger involved. These are qualities I once dismissed as weakness in my own brother, qualities I failed to properly value until it was far too late." His voice grew quieter, more personal, though still carrying clearly through the silent room. "You have shown me these same qualities, time and again, since the day you stepped aboard this vessel. You have proven, beyond any doubt, that strength comes in many forms, and that the form you possess is no less valuable than the form my own people are born with." He extended his hand toward me, a gesture I recognized as significant among his species, reserved typically for equals rather than subordinates. I clasped his hand firmly, feeling the weight of everything we had endured together settle into that simple gesture. "Among my people," he said, his voice carrying a warmth I had never heard from him before, "there is no higher honor than to call another warrior brother. It is a title earned through shared danger, through proven loyalty, through the kind of trust that cannot be faked or rushed." He paused, his amber eyes meeting mine with unmistakable sincerity. "Leo Grant," he said, using my given name for the first time since I had known him, "you have earned that title, as surely as if you had been born among my own people. From this day forward, I name you brother, and I will stand beside you in any battle, against any danger, for as long as we both draw breath." The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of his words settling over everyone gathered there, before Commander Prax began clapping, quickly followed by Nyla Voss, Reska Dorn, and the rest of the crew who had witnessed this unexpected declaration. I felt an overwhelming rush of emotion, pride and relief, and something deeper that I couldn't quite name, all mixing together into a feeling I would carry with me for the rest of my life. "Thank you," I said finally, my voice thick with emotion. "Brother." The word felt strange on my tongue, spoken towards someone who had once treated me with nothing but cold dismissal, yet it also felt entirely right, earned through months of struggle, danger, and slowly built trust that neither of us could have predicted when I first stepped aboard this ship. In the days that followed, word of Dravencor's declaration spread throughout the Coalition fleet, and I found myself treated with a respect I had never experienced before, not just as a curiosity or an experiment in Coalition diversity, but as a proven warrior who had earned his place among the stars through actions rather than words. Humanity, I realized, had finally found its footing among the Coalition, not through demonstrations of raw strength we could never hope to match, but through the qualities that had always defined us at our best: loyalty, compassion, the refusal to abandon those who needed help, regardless of personal cost. These were the qualities that Dravencor had once dismissed as weakness, and these were the very qualities that had ultimately earned humanity's place among the greatest warriors the galaxy had ever known. As I stood on the observation deck that evening, watching the stars stretch endlessly before us, I thought about how far I had come since that first day, mocked and dismissed by nearly everyone around me. I thought about Dravencor's brother, Kalen, whose memory had shaped so much of what I had experienced aboard this ship, and I silently promised to honor that memory by living up to the trust that had finally been placed in me. The stars ahead held countless unknown dangers, countless future battles that would test everything I had learned and everything I had yet to discover about my own capabilities. But for the first time since leaving Earth, I faced that unknown future not with uncertainty about my place among the stars, but with quiet, unshakable confidence that I belonged there, standing shoulder to shoulder with warriors who had once called me weak, now calling me brother instead. And as the Halcyon continued its journey through the endless expanse of space, I understood that this was only the beginning of a story, far larger than myself, a story about what it truly meant for humanity to take its place among the stars, not through strength alone, but through the unbreakable bonds of loyalty, courage, and hard-earned respect.